issue that we've been working on for several years. I will start us off by providing some context about how regulatory water quality monitoring is handled in the state of New Jersey. Then we'll hear from Dr. Christy McDonald, who is the science director at Raritan Headwaters Association, about their own great example of this, their own volunteer stream monitoring program. Bill Kibler is the policy director at Raritan Headwaters, and he'll walk us through the story of how a legal challenge arose to the use of Raritan Headwaters community water monitoring data in the first place. Then we'll dig deeper into the litigation with two speakers from the Eastern Environmental Law Center, who represented the Watershed Institute, Raritan Headwaters, and the New Jersey Highlands Coalition on an amicus brief that we filed. So Chris Miller is the executive director, and Dan Greenhouse is the senior staff attorney. They'll talk about the legal framework of the case, how the New Jersey Appellate Court handled the appellant's four main issues, and ultimately how New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection's Category 1 designations in the Raritan River Basin were upheld. So this is a positive story for us. I just want to mention here that none of the statements that we make are on behalf of the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. So the New Jersey Watershed Watch Network is how the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection connects with its non-agency monitoring partners. The network is a program of and at the Watershed Institute with full funding from New Jersey DEP. And this is because we've had a rich history of volunteer or community-based water quality monitoring here in the state. There's currently about 30 community partners who are collecting data throughout the state. And we're fortunate to have a number of groups in our area that are available to assist with community monitoring. So one example of that, EPA Region 2, located in Edison, they cover New Jersey, New York, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. They're one of maybe 2 to 3 EPA regions throughout the country that has its own designated participatory science coordinator. They provide equipment loans to different groups every year. We also have groups like the Interstate Environmental Commission who provide bacterial data analysis for free to some groups. So we have a lot of people out there who are collecting this information and have been for a number of years. So Raritan Headwaters Association and the Watershed Institute are two of those largest and longest running programs. When we launched the Watershed Watch Network back in 2018, we started by we wanted to kind of explore with these groups and figure out what did they need from the department, what did they need to be able to run healthy, sustainable programs. And so from that survey, there were really 3 issues that came out. So number one, groups in New Jersey wanted clearly defined requirements and expectations for the kind of data that they'd be collecting and submitting to the department. So it may have been a little bit wishy-washy in the past, or there wasn't specifically a person to go to ask and get questions answered about QUAPs. So creating those clearly defined expectations was kind of number one on the list. And next, groups really wanted some help in developing quality assurance project plans and also a clear pathway for having them submitted and approved at the department. And then number 3, as it is with so many groups throughout the country, funding and staff was a big thing. So groups clearly need to be able to support themselves and the work that they're doing on behalf of DEP. So we kind of established the roles of the Watershed Watch Network accordingly, trying to meet the expectations of the groups and provide services to groups while also providing benefits to the agency, to NJDEP. So first we created the data quality tier definitions and guidance, and did establish that clear pathway for folks to submit their quality assurance project plans or QUAPs to us and we have now kind of a list of people that it goes through at DEP. And so the QAP approvals are getting more streamlined and hopefully quicker as well. And so what does DEP get out of that? Well, they get more data for regulatory reporting. So things like the integrated report, which we'll hear about in a little bit, they have data of a known and sufficient quality. We're also, to kind of help with the QAP submission process, we provide one-on-one technical assistance to groups very early on in the process if they're coming up with study design, or further along, helping them, write their QAP, format their QAP, and check off all the boxes that they need to. So to that end, we've created some standardized templates for QAPs, for data sheets, and also for data entry to the Water Quality Exchange. And we provide training and testing and accreditation for staff and volunteers of monitoring programs throughout the state. And so what does DEP get out of this? They get more consistent data between those individual monitoring programs, the 30 or so that are operating in the state of New Jersey. We can now kind of provide standardization of how that data is collected and submitted. So the network also serves as a communications pathway between groups and the agency. So now there's kind of a one-stop shop. If you've got a question about community water monitoring, you can definitely go through the network. And if I don't have the answer, I can certainly connect you with someone who does. And coming up very soon, we are launching for the first time the network a grants program. And so we will be able to provide some of that funding and equipment to groups who are looking to build new programs or grow those that already exist. DEP, what do they get out of that? We start to see the data kind of expand throughout the state, so we get a more comprehensive view of water quality, and we're able to assess more every 2-year integrated report cycle. So the first thing was creating that clearly defined pathway and expectations for monitoring. We decided to adopt a 3-tiered system to help DEP be able to kind of judge programs and quality assurance project plans that are coming in, and also to provide that guidance to the groups so they know exactly what to expect depending on their data use needs. So tier 1, we refer to as educational. Because this data is being used kind of at the local level, it could be a high school classroom going out to collect macroinvertebrates. You just really need to have defined methods, locations, and a time frame to fit under that tier 1 category. Tier 2, we call this our targeting tier, and the uses of this data are a little bit expanded. So we're able to use this data to figure out if restoration projects are working, to monitor upstream and downstream of dam removals, to figure out where we might need to focus more intensive monitoring even. So the requirements for tier 2 data is that there is a quality assurance project plan on file that uses standard methods. So just using things that are scientifically sound to be able to collect that information. So tier 3 data, because this data is submitted to DEP, used for regulatory purposes, the requirements for data quality are higher. So under this tier 3 category, you have to have a quality assurance project plan that is approved either by the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, EPA, or by USGS. We have to use certified labs for any chemical and microbiological analyses. And then if we're doing bioassessment monitoring, so macroinvertebrates and habitat monitoring, all the groups have to use an approved method, and those are all outlined in guidance documents that we've shared with groups. So also included in that, in tier 3 monitoring, each group has to comply with a set of quality assurance data standards to make sure that they're meeting those minimum requirements and really trying to match the quality of their data as closely as they can with the data being collected by the department itself. So the quality assurance project plans are reviewed and resubmitted every 3 years. They are approved by 4 different levels of folks at New Jersey DEP. from those who work on freshwater and biological monitoring all the way up to the Office of Quality Assurance. So there's lots of eyes on these QAPs, and lots of comments go back to the groups. And so they have to make changes according to what DEP sees as a necessary aspect of the program. So for each of these QAPs that's going into DEP, we add in field accreditations for all monitoring personnel. So before anyone goes out into the field for the first time, and also every 3 years thereafter, we have to go out, watch what they're doing. We have a checklist of things that we're looking for to make sure that they're doing everything that they need to do, that they're collecting that data with integrity, and that we are able to rely on that data when they then go out to collect on their own. For groups that are doing their own macroinvertebrate identifications, whether that's streamside or back in a lab with preserved samples, we require identification testing. So that's 50 organisms, 50 preserved organisms. They have to get 90% correct in order to pass. I know that seems like a really high bar, but the vast majority of participants do end up passing that benchmark. We also have 10% of all of our field sites sampled in duplicate. So they collect 2 macroinvertebrate samples at 10% of their sites. And that's just to help us judge how well they are able to collect those macroinvertebrate samples in the field. 5% of the sites every year are eligible or subject to audit by NJDEP staff. So I will perform field accreditations as part of the New Jersey Watershed Watch Network, and then DEP will come out and do their own regulatory audits. They schedule these with groups in advance. We try to spread out the audits between different volunteers, so we're not just kind of focusing on the same people over and over, but it's kind of like a spot check to make sure, again, that everyone knows what they're doing out there in the field. And then our last requirement is that the data is submitted to the EPA's Water Quality Exchange. So it's from WQX, and it ends up on the Water Quality Portal, that data. That's where the data is pulled by DEP and then used in their own integrated reporting. So what are we doing here? What's the ultimate goal? Well, we're all trying to achieve the swimmable, fishable, and drinkable waters that the Clean Water Act stipulated for us. And so the Watershed Watch Network, we try to kind of add value to these different programs by providing technical assistance, by providing training, by administering the accreditations and testing. Soon we'll be able to provide that funding as well. And then the groups themselves, the 30 or so groups throughout the state, will then conduct the monitoring. And not just the monitoring, but they're also engaging with their volunteers, with stakeholders, and hopefully, well, not hopefully, they're definitely educating their own constituents in water quality issues. From that, the deliverables from those activities, if it's a nonprofit putting a deliverable together, that they could be water quality report cards that they can then share with municipalities, start up conversations about why water quality is the way that it is, and just share that data publicly. So we kind of all are aware of our water quality conditions in real time. And then DEP will put together water quality assessments for the integrated report as well, based on community data as well as their own, of course. What do we get out of that? Well, directly, for those who are participating in these programs, we really do see kind of a change in behavior after you participate, after you volunteer in a monitoring program. You learn more about your water body, you're more connected with it, and they're much more likely to initiate their own pollutant reduction activities or live a river-friendly lifestyle, as we like to say at the Watershed Institute. But then what does DEP do with this data? Well, they can, for impaired streams, put them on a 303D list and then initiate total maximum daily loads, TMDLs, for those streams to try to improve the water quality there. For those streams that are optimal, that are very healthy, then we can designate them as a Category 1, which provides them with some additional protections. So this is just a basic overview of how we conduct water quality monitoring in New Jersey. Now I'm going to pass it off to Christy McDonald from Raritan Headwaters to provide an excellent example of all of this.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to share my screen here. Hold on for 1 second. We're having some technical difficulties. Probably am sharing my screen right now.
Well,
sorry, just give me a moment here.
All right, well, Christy's doing that. Let's ask a question. There's a question in the Q&A. What level do volunteers ID macroinvertebrates? I'm curious, as to you said, most can pass their macroinvertebrate testing.
Yeah, that's a great question. Most of our, well, we have a list of 22 taxa that we tend to focus on in volunteer programs. And it's kind of a range from class to family, depending on the taxa, but generally in the order level.
There you go.
Well, it looks like we're up there. And
you
hi,
are.
everybody. I am Christy McDonald. I'm the Director of Science at Raritan Headwaters. And I'm joined here by our Policy Director, Bill Kibler, who's going to also be speaking in a little while. And I'm going to be talking about our wonderful volunteer stream monitoring program that we've had going since really the organization began in 1959. But really in the 90s is when we started to collect data in a consistent way. So we actually have long-term data going back to the 90s. And a lot of the data is collected by citizen scientists. We couldn't do it without them. But I'm just going to give you a little bit of background about Raritan Headwaters. As I said, we've been around since 1959. Our mission is to engage citizens and decision makers in the protection of our watershed and beyond through science, education, land preservation, and advocacy. You can see the state of New Jersey divided into regions. The largest river basin that's only within the state of New Jersey happens to be the Raritan Basin, and the Raritan Basin is here in orange. That includes the Upper Raritan, which is our region that the Raritan Headwaters focuses on, as well as the Stony Brook Millstone, the Lower Raritan, and the Rahway and Elizabeth River watersheds. Focusing in a little bit just on the Upper Raritan, highlighted here in beige. We have a 470 square mile watershed region. The North Branch and South Branch Raritan River are the main rivers in the region, and there are lots of tributaries. The confluence is here with the Lower Raritan, which then flows down stream and into Raritan Bay. Over here, just for context, if there's anyone here who's not familiar with this area of New Jersey and the New York metropolitan area, we have Lower Manhattan over here. It's a very, very urbanized area just east of us, but when you come into the Upper Raritan, you see that we've got a lot of forests. We do have urbanization and ag as well. But we are the source water for about 1.8 million people in New Jersey. And you can see here, two of our largest reservoirs in the state, Round Valley and Spruce Run, which provide drinking water supplies to a lot of the urban regions that are outside of our watershed. So we're going to be talking, and I'm not really going to focus too much on the Category 1 upgrades because we have the policy folks and the lawyers who helped us defend these upgrades. But on the left, you see a map here of New Jersey. In pink are the surface water anti-degradation designations. The pink is category 1 as of March 2011. And this is really, a lot of that is found in the upper Raritan of our basin. And over here, we can see the areas that were upgraded to category 1 in 2020. I know this is a busy slide. I just gave a lightning talk and I was only allowed to have 1 slide. So this slide is just kind of like a big summary of all the work Raritan Headwaters is doing. I love this map. This is part of our watershed conservation plan, and you can see the inset of the state of New Jersey here. This is the upper Raritan region. We used water quality data, much of it our own data, land use data, and lots of other information to try to look at our 52 sub watersheds and see what should be the targets for protection for these areas. So you see over here a scale of blue to green. Blue are areas that have degraded water quality, a lot of urbanization or agricultural land use. And so that's where we're really targeting restoration. We do need nature to help us protect water resources. So we might be doing reforestation projects, stream buffer projects. I'm focusing on best management practices, and a lot of that might be green infrastructure to try to replace pavement with areas that are going to help to absorb stormwater. And then the green area, this swath here, is really the area where we still have a lot of forest, luckily. We know that forest is very closely tied to water quality, and we need forests in our watershed in order to provide drinking water that's clean and healthy for our residents. So that's based on lots of forest cover. The water quality data is showing that the water quality is pretty good in these green areas. So we should really be focusing on preservation. If we can protect those forests, if we can take care of those forests, if we can acquire them or put land use easements or other types of rules and regs, or just better land use planning, that would be a target. And then lots of areas have both of those things. Like the aqua blue is just areas where you still have some forest you can preserve, but you still have a lot of need for restoration. So it all kind of goes back though, and the reason I chose to keep this slide in here is that the monitoring and research and the science informs pretty much every one of these aspects of how we approach watershed conservation. And so the monitoring we're doing, we see here we have one of our Sentinel climate stations that's collecting data every 15 minutes on conductivity, depth, and temperature in our streams. We see a couple of our stream monitors doing the benthic macroinvertebrate surveys and habitat assessments that we do every year. And we have other monitoring projects we're doing, all because in order to talk to municipal decision makers, to hopefully protect, areas that need more protection or restoration, we need to back that up with information. We need to have, a reason why to justify spending more money or targeting a certain project or area. So I'm going to talk more about that. So this again is our watershed. You're probably starting to recognize the shape here. This is the upper Raritan, and you can again see Spruce Run and Round Valley reservoirs. These are our monitoring sites. So these blue dots throughout the watershed are 74 or so monitoring sites that we have throughout the upper Raritan. And that's a lot of area. Again, it's 470 square mile area, and we have a lot of streams to monitor. So what kind of data are we collecting? We're collecting annual benthic macroinvertebrate, visual habitat, and chemical data in June and July. We have bi-weekly chemical and bacterial monitoring that we do with Raritan Valley Community College, quarterly impaired site monitoring. When we have an impaired site based on the benthic macroinvertebrates, we focus in on that and we try to go there to look at what could be causing those impairments. We're also monitoring several dam removal projects and stream restoration projects pre and post to demonstrate what kind of impacts those projects will have on water quality and stream health. And as I mentioned, our Raritan Sentinel climate stations, are out there deployed in our streams. You can see the data on our website, and our NAC, which is North Atlantic Aquatic Connectivity Consortium Stream Crossing Assessments. And I just threw in a couple pictures here, so we're going to see a lot more of our benthic macroinvertebrate monitoring. But I wanted to show you, we also have a water quality lab here at our main headquarters in Bedminster at Fairview Farm Wildlife Preserve. And these are some of our volunteers conducting NAC stream crossing assessments to look at connectivity of streams on one side and the other of that road crossing. And these are some of our citizen scientists that we're going to be talking more about that are dedicated, highly trained, and are really providing a service to all of us by helping us to gather this data. I'm not going to go to this website right now, but this is, and you can actually look at every one of our stream monitoring sites since it's been part of our program on our website. There are links, and you can actually go to them and you can look at the data over time. So it's something, that's one way we share our data. We'll talk more later, but we have our WQX, which is another way that we share our data. So how do we do that? How do we get to 74 monitoring sites so frequently? We really rely on our stream monitoring team. Most of the stream monitoring team are people who have other jobs or they're retired. Some of them are our summer interns and our staff, but a lot of them, and probably I would say 90% of them, are people that are volunteering, and they're volunteering not only to go out that 1 or 2 days that they go to do monitoring, but they're volunteering to undergo very intense and rigorous training. These are 2 separate training days that we held, and they took place in May of 2023, and these are the 2 groups of stream monitors attending. We also had the DEP that day present to certify our stream monitors, to just make sure they're doing a good job in collecting the data and observing them in the field. So Raritan Headwaters data are used for regulatory decision making. In particular, we're talking about the benthic macroinvertebrate data, which is used to calculate the HGMI, high gradient macroinvertebrate index, or it's an index of biotic integrity that reflects the health of the stream, as well as our habitat visual assessments. So the data that we're gathering is, really important because it's something that the DEP would otherwise not have if we were not doing it. And our citizen science data is being challenged, or has been challenged. RHA provided support for the rigor of benthic macroinvertebrate and visual habitat data that we've collected. We're very confident that our volunteers were highly trained. We also have scientists who are in the field collecting data. Some of our volunteers are scientists themselves, real scientists who have a day job as a scientist. In addition, we provided some, reviews of literature to support the 300-foot buffers around C1 streams. So why does DEP trust our data? For one, our program, the oversight of our citizen science program is done by PhD and master's level scientists, like most citizen science programs. And in addition to that, our science staff do visit each of our monitoring sites once every 5 years. So we do have data collected by our science staff as well as citizen scientists. We have a DEP approved QUAP. We have monitors from diverse backgrounds. They're highly trained. And we have very strict QA/QC protocols. We also use the exact same methods that the DEP uses to collect their stream data. So again, we said biological samples, the benthic macroinvertebrates, and the visual habitat assessments, in particular the total habitat score, were the 2 areas where the DEP is using our data. So our monitoring program, we're interested in our data. We use our data for our own purposes, but it's very important to us that the data are also used by the DEP and that we're helping them to understand what's happening in the environment and how healthy our streams are. So some of the things that we do is we screen for impaired subwatersheds. We try to look for the causes. We identify the sources and severity of the problem. We also do long-term trend analyses. Some of the changes that are happening in the environment are slow, but also some of them are fast. So we might get a really bad storm like Ian, where because we're out there every year, we're able to look at the impacts of that one major event. And then we're able to engage citizen scientists. As Erin said, that's a very big part of this program, is that we have a bunch of ambassadors for the importance of protecting and restoring streams. So we're out there and are experienced with the work we're doing. So these are just a couple examples of slides. We show our monitors. We have intensive training for our monitors. I'm not going to go into every detail of this, but new monitors must attend 2 classroom sessions as well as almost a full day in-stream field training. Then they shadow either science staff or they shadow a very experienced monitor their first season. All of our monitors must come back to receive additional training every 3 years. They're also certified by the DEP, which gives us another, like we feel more confident in our data that we're getting that extra attention from the DEP to make sure that our monitors are doing a good job. We try to focus on the issues that we know exist. So if in the past, because we've been around for a long time, we might know that, oh, some monitors don't understand that they must complete 10 kicks and do 10 samples within that stream. So we really fully emphasize that. We'll repeat it over and over to make sure that they understand they must do that. I think I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go a little faster. So this is an example of something we show them. On the left is not what we like to see from our benthic macroinvertebrate sample. On the right is what we do like to see. We like to see that they've put the entire sample in the jar. So this is an example of where we really emphasize the areas that need attention from the volunteers that we've seen in the past where there's been some questions. We also use a certified taxonomist at Norman Doe Labs to do all of our taxonomy. And then from the data we get back from Norman Doe, we're able to calculate the high gradient macroinvertebrate index, which is an index that gives a number for how healthy that community of benthic macroinvertebrates is in our streams. And it's based on genus level data. Then there's the visual habitat assessment. We're just trying to get a sense of what are conditions like around the stream and in the stream. And is the habitat able to support a healthy benthic macroinvertebrate community? The scored habitat sheet is a quantified summary metric of habitat quality based on 10 EPA parameters. The total habitat score is used by agencies for regulatory purposes. And you're always out there. The team has at least 2 to 3 people, usually a couple more. And the team comes to a consensus on each line in the habitat sheet. So this is just one part of it. It shows how the score is from 0 to 20. Typically, the volunteers will deliberate and they will decide on their score. Our stream data are used by, as we know, our regulatory agencies, the DEP, the EPA. Our local municipalities are using our data. And we are using our data. So I'm not going to go into all the different ways we're using it. These slides are going to be shared with you. But if anybody would like to learn more, please reach out to me. And I just want to give a big thank you to all of our volunteer stream monitors and other citizen scientists who are contributing their time and they're gaining the knowledge needed to be a citizen scientist. So I also want to thank the organizers from the Watershed Institute and inviting us here today to speak. Thank you very much.
All right, Bill, you're up.
Thank you, Mike.
Are we, okay,
I don't see these slides on there.
are you seeing, okay,
Christy, you may need to unshare.
oh. Okay,
There we go.
there we are.
All right, thanks everybody for your patience. My name is Bill Kibler. I'm the policy director here at Raritan Headwaters. And my task today is to give you a non-legal walk through the story of how we got from standing in a stream conducting citizen science to standing in a courtroom defending citizen science. In order to understand that process of how we got there, I think it would be very helpful if you understand at least a little bit about New Jersey's surface water quality standards, and in particular how they apply to the monitoring that we do at Raritan Headwaters and the Category 1 designation that DEP was doing. So we're going to kind of walk through part of the surface water quality standards. This is surface water quality standards in a nutshell. I will warn you, this is the piece I'm going to talk about a little bit about surface water quality standards is the truth. It is not, however, the whole truth. There is a lot more to the surface water quality standards than what we're going to talk about today. So please spend a little time looking at them elsewhere. The surface water quality standards are regulations promulgated by the Department of Environmental Protection intended to help protect New Jersey's surface waters. There is a separate set of regulations that address groundwater quality standards. Today, we're just going to focus on surface water quality standards. We won't be addressing groundwater. The surface water quality standards do three important things. First, they establish designated uses for surface water bodies in the state of New Jersey. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. It then classifies surface waters based on those designated uses. So what classification does a body of water, surface water, get? And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that on a future slide. And then finally, it sets water quality criteria to protect those designated uses, because under the Federal Clean Water Act, the state has an obligation to do that. Oh, I need to back up one. There we go. Okay, so the list of designated uses are here. You can read them. These are a function of the purposes of surface water uses in New Jersey and the uses that need to get protected. Just as a note, all New Jersey fresh water is designated as a designated use for public drinking water supply. Not that it all gets used for public drinking water supply, but it is a designated use for all New Jersey fresh water. So that's an important area. As Christy mentioned, we've got 2 large reservoirs in our watershed, so public water supply is always an important thing for us. We are not today going to talk about shellfish harvesting. I don't know anything about saltwater, so we're strictly going to be talking about freshwater uses today. All that good saltwater stuff and brackish water stuff you'll have to handle on your own. So the surface water quality standards designate these uses for freshwater, for surface waters in the state of New Jersey. The waters are then classified based on those designated uses. There are essentially 3 surface water classifications for freshwater. Again, we're not talking about saltwater here today, but the first is FW1. FW1 are exceptional waters that are to be protected in their natural state. Christy had those on her map earlier. They were the ones in the bright green. There aren't very many of these in the state, actual FW1 waters. They are subject to a non-degradation standard, which means they're not subject to any human wastewater discharges or increases in runoff from human activities. Second categorization is pinelands waters. There is a separate category in the surface water quality standards dealing with the pinelands. They effectively get the same protection as FW1 waters. And then the final one is FW2, which is basically everything that's not FW1 or Pinelands waters. FW2 is then subdivided into 3 subcategories: trout production, that is water in which trout can reproduce; trout maintenance, that is water that trout may not be able to reproduce in, but if you put them there, they'll survive. You can tell it's a very non-technical description, but there you go. And the last is non-trout, that is waters that won't support a trout population, but need to be protected for other reasons, like, for example, they may be part of a water supply system. So now we get the surface water quality standards themselves. We get to the heart of them, which is the anti-degradation policies. The purpose of the anti-degradation standard is to ensure that our surface water bodies can continue to support the designated uses that they have today, and that any designated uses that they have, if they're designated for a use and they don't meet the standards for that use yet, to make sure that we are protecting water quality and improving water quality, so that we can get to the point where we are meeting all of our designated uses. So there are 3 anti-degradation categories under the surface water quality standards. First is outstanding natural resource waters. This is the FW1 waters that we just talked about, and the Pinelands waters. They're subject to a non-degradation standard. We're not talking about that standard in the context of this litigation, so we're going to leave that one alone. The second is category 1. Category 1 waters are designated by a rulemaking by the department. So the department provides a list of the following stream segments or water bodies are hereby designated category 1. They get an anti-degradation protection, which means they're protected from any measurable change to existing water quality. And the reason they're being protected is either they have exceptional ecological significance, exceptional recreational significance, exceptional water supply significance, or exceptional fisheries resources. Or it could be more than one of those reasons put together, but any one of those is reason enough to be designated category 1. And then category 2 is everything else. So here's the, okay, so that's the factual piece. I'm going to warn you now, there might be a little opinion. I might throw a little opinion on the table during this piece of it. This is my admittedly biased story of how we wound up in court, how we got from stream monitoring to standing in court. So in 2020, the DEP, by rulemaking, as I mentioned, upgraded 600 miles of streams throughout the state to category 1. These are waters that were previously category 2, they were upgraded to category 1. This applied that strict anti-degradation standard to, among other things, discharges that impact the category 1 waters. This is really important for us in the watershed world, because this is one of the very powerful tools we have to limit development impacts within 300 feet of the stream and to limit discharges to streams and help protect as well as improve water quality by doing that. Our citizen scientists collected data. That data that they collected was used by DEP to support upgrading 200 miles of streams in our watershed. DEP had other data to support the upgrades as well, but in our watershed in particular, they relied on the data, in part relied on the data provided by our citizen scientists. So our watershed is WMA8, Watershed Management Area 8. There are 21 WMAs in the state. We are one of 21. We got 1/3 of the new category 1 miles. And the reason for that really is a testament to the importance of citizen science. It's because of the strength of our citizen science team and our science staff led by Christy over here. And that's how we were able to get such a large number of new category 1 streams in our watershed. And since we provide drinking water, as Christy mentioned, to 1.8 million people, we're happy to have the category 1 designations. So what did this mean? We're still not in court yet. Everything sounds good so far. Well, we have some communities in our watershed who had development plans. In particular, put a crimp on development plans in Raritan Township. It put a crimp potentially on redevelopment plans in Flemington Borough. Not really sure it was going to crimp their redevelopment. They were concerned that it might. And the reason it put a crimp on their development plans is because Raritan Township, Flemington Borough, and Reddington Township send their wastewater to the Raritan Township Municipal Utilities Authority. That's the RTMUA you see there. The RTMUA runs the local wastewater treatment plant, and they contract their services to Reddington, Raritan, and Flemington. The RTMUA is at capacity, and when I say sort of, the reason I say sort of is because they're not really at physical capacity, they're at contractual capacity. So each one of those three municipalities gets a share of the wastewater capacity at the wastewater treatment plant, and bottom line, Raritan Township really didn't have any capacity left at the RTMUA. So the development plans they had to increase development in the town, they were going to have difficulty addressing that because they didn't have the wastewater capacity at the RTMUA to handle that. And because the RTMUA didn't have a way to take more wastewater from Raritan Township, the proposal was to expand the size of the wastewater treatment plant. And expanding the wastewater treatment plant, they would have also increased their discharge. If the water immediately downstream of the RTMUA is category 1, it gets a strict anti-degradation standard, and the RTMUA's discharge wouldn't be allowed to be able to impact that category 1 water. So they would be grandfathered with their existing permit, so they don't have to change their business the way they're doing it now, but they wouldn't be able to increase their discharge or create new discharges. So as a result of that, Raritan Township, the RTMUA, Raritan Township Municipal Utilities Authority, and Hunterdon County sued the department in an attempt to overturn the category 1 rulemaking. Because the folks who sued were challenging the citizen science that was in part the basis for DEP's rulemaking, we decided that we should weigh in on this matter. So Raritan Headwaters, the Watershed Institute, and the Highlands Coalition went in search of some high quality lawyers, and we were lucky enough to find them at the Eastern Environmental Law Center. They represented us as amicus parties in the appeal. And with that, I will turn it over to our very capable attorneys.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks,
Just going to share my screen here. Okay, hopefully you all can see what I'm seeing.
You're good.
All right, great. Hello to everybody. I'm Chris Miller, Executive Director of Eastern Environmental Law Center. I want to start by thanking the Watershed Institute for putting on this event today. Thanks to my fellow presenters, and thanks to everybody who's decided to take time out of their Friday afternoon to be with us here today. Just to give you a quick thumbnail sketch of Eastern Environmental Law Center for those of you who may not be familiar with us. We're a 501c3 nonprofit public interest law firm based in Newark, founded by the late, great Edward Lloyd, who some of you may know. And we focus, our team of dedicated staff attorneys, one of whom is here with me today, focus on three primary practice areas: environmental justice, clean energy, and then what we call open space and sustainable development, which in practice is really, challenging governmental approvals, a lot of times DEP permits for, unsustainable development that encroaches on our state's environmentally sensitive areas. So I'm going to start, and I think the previous presenters material they covered segues nicely into what I'm going to talk about. But I'm really going to start by zooming out to the Clean Water Act, because that's really where a lot of the New Jersey statutes and the activities that were at issue in the appeal emanate from, as well as the legal issues, and a lot of the terms that you see in the appellate division's decision are emanate from the Clean Water Act. So this may be a review for some of you, but I think it's important to kind of frame the appellate division's decision. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about, for those of you who take the time to read the 90+ page decision from the appellate division, you'll see, a lot of what I'm going to talk about reflected in that opinion. I think the appellate division did a nice job of sort of laying out the framework for a lot of these complicated issues. So as Aaron pointed out earlier, the kind of origin point for all of this is the goal of the Clean Water Act, the Section 101A2 goals of our nation's waters being fishable and swimmable wherever attainable. And how does the Clean Water Act aim to do that? Through permitting, water quality standards, and a system of ongoing water quality assessment and reporting. So I'm sure many of us are familiar, with respect to the permitting side of things. We have our Section 402 NPDES permit program, which regulates discharges of pollutants from a point source into waters of the United States and prohibits discharges without those permits. Section 404, the dredge and fill program, which prohibits discharge of dredge and fill material into jurisdictional waters without a permit. That's administered in most cases by the Army Corps of Engineers. And then we have our Section 401 water quality certification program, which gives states an opportunity to certify that a project for which a federal agency has granted a license or permit will not run afoul of the state's water quality standards. So as Bill did a good job of laying out, I'm going to kind of just get into the water quality standards. I won't spend too much time on it. But there's three core components there. You have your designated use, which is based on the existing public use. It's not limited to that. If the water quality actually supports a higher use, that has to be a designated use. For example, recreation, propagation of fish, shellfish, and wildlife. Then you have your water quality criteria, which are established to protect the designated uses. And those criteria can be expressed numerically in the form of a maximum concentration limit on pollutants or in a narrative form. And then the third component is the anti-degradation requirement, where a water body is meeting the water quality standards. The Clean Water Act requires that policies be put in place to protect and maintain that water quality that's already been achieved. Got a little bit of a sticky mouse here. Just bear with me while I try to get to the next slide. Jumping around a little bit. I apologize for that. Okay, and then the sort of third aspect of the Clean Water Act that I mentioned is the periodic assessment of water quality and reporting program. And we have Section 303D, which requires states every 2 years to identify waters of the state that are not meeting the established water quality standards and not supporting the designated uses. And those are referred to as impaired waters, where waters are impaired, that requires the establishment of a total maximum daily load for pollutants, and that's aimed at bringing the water quality up to meet the standards. In a related mechanism, we have Section 305B, which again, every 2 years, requires states to report on the quality of all waters in the state and whether they're supporting water supply use, recreation activities, and aquatic life. And those two analyses can be reported in a single report to EPA, and that's called the integrated report, which we heard Aaron mention earlier. So that kind of sets the stage at the Clean Water Act level. And so from there, I'll talk about, so the New Jersey statutory framework that's, at issue in this case. And that is the New Jersey Water Pollution Control Act and the New Jersey Water Quality Planning Act. Those are the two statutes which are derived from the Clean Water Act, which gives DEP the authority to issue their surface water quality standards. The Water Pollution Control Act governs wastewater treatment plants. It imposes the NPDES permit requirement, which in New Jersey we refer to as the NGPDES program, and incorporates the effluent limitations that are necessary for those dischargers to meet the surface water quality standards. And then under the Water Quality Planning Act, DEP needs to develop a statewide plan to achieve the water quality standards. And that includes determining what the effluent limitations will be, establishing compliance schedules, and the determination of TMDLs. Bill already covered this, so I'm just going to quickly run through this again. The surface water quality standards include the designated uses. So for example, primary contact recreation, swimming. The use classifications, freshwater 1, not subject to any man-made wastewater discharges. It includes primary contact recreation. And freshwater 2, all other freshwaters except the Pinelands, and that also includes primary contact recreation. We've got our water quality criteria, which are set to protect those uses. They're expressed as MCLs for specific pollutants. And then we have our anti-degradation designations, which at issue here, of course, are C1. And again, those are protected from any measurable change to existing water quality because of their exceptional ecological significance. So for example, that's suitable habitat for certain aquatic species. Continuing on with the statutory framework in New Jersey, I'm going to talk about two statutes, two New Jersey statutes, which are at issue in the appeal. And this is kind of like where the rubber hits the road in terms of restricting development and the controversy in this appeal. The Flood Hazard Area Control Act, and we could do a whole other webinar on that statute, but the relevant part here is that it restricts development within a 300-foot riparian zone. That's the word from the statute, but that's a development buffer along any C1 water and all upstream tributaries within the same Huck 14 watershed. Similarly, the Water Quality Management Planning Act restricts sewer service within that riparian zone and the upstream tributaries. So that sort of hopefully ties the statutory framework at the federal and New Jersey state levels together, so that as we talk about the specific legal issues in the appeal, we'll sort of understand the overarching framework and how we got there and where these requirements derive from. So an important part of the case here was the Administrative Procedure Act, New Jersey's APA. It's probably similar to what we have in many other states if you're not familiar with New Jersey, but it requires a 30-day notice and public comment period on a proposed rule. It requires the agency to publish various analyses of the proposed rules, for example, an economic impact statement. It requires the promulgating agency to review the public comments, to summarize them and identify who they were submitted by. And in some circumstances where there's, great public interest or a request by legislature, a public hearing will be held on 15 days notice. And one of the issues in this appeal was whether DEP complied with the APA in issuing the surface water quality standard amendments. And the appellate division noted that under our law, DEP had to engage in substantial compliance with the APA. So lack of proper notice or an inability for the public to comment on the rule would result in the finding that the agency failed to comply with the APA. So this is review at this point, but for those of us not familiar, and I think there were some great visual depictions of this earlier in the presentation, but the Raritan River in its entirety drains an area of about 1,100 square miles in central New Jersey. For New Jersey, sort of a mountainous, hilly area. It empties into Raritan Bay, ultimately into the Atlantic Ocean. The DEP surface water quality standards upgraded approximately 600 miles of streams in that watershed to C1 status. Okay, getting into the rulemaking process and how these rules that were being challenged on appeal came to be. In 2019, DEP proposed the amendments. They actually proposed to upgrade approximately 750 miles. And the proposal specifically noted that the RHA, Raritan Headwaters Association, stream monitoring program collected high quality data to support the assessment of surface water quality and the overall health of the Raritan River watershed, and that DEP considered that in support of the Category 1 designation process. DEP here did hold a public hearing and an extended public comment period, and our clients participated in that. And then DEP adopted the proposal with non-substantial changes, actually reducing the upgraded stream miles to about 600. And then in April 2020, we have the final rule being published in the New Jersey Register. So the segment of the Raritan River that was at issue in this appeal primarily was the Three Bridges segment, which is a 33-mile stretch of the South Branch Raritan River. It's classified as freshwater 2. And DEP concluded that this segment supported a, quote, exceptional aquatic community based on demonstrated non-impaired macroinvertebrate community, which for us non-science folks, those are bottom-dwelling worms, mollusks, crustaceans, optimal in-stream habitat in the segment, and a low percentage of impervious surface. That third prong wasn't at issue on appeal. It focused more on the benthic macroinvertebrates and the optimal in-stream habitat. So I won't be able to get too far into this. I think the other presenters did a great job of talking about the sampling process, but it was addressed by the appellate division in its opinion. And DEP's rule proposal itself detailed the methodology for sampling the macroinvertebrates. Samples were collected per DEP's standard operating manual, which itself was based on EPA's protocols. So DEP collected its own samples, but it also considers data submitted by other groups like Raritan Headwaters Association if it's collected in accordance with the quality assurance project plan, which we heard about, and with data collection requirements for submission of an integrated report. RHA's citizen volunteers worked in partnership with professional scientists and government decision makers to collect macroinvertebrate samples at more than 50 sites. And this is reflected in the court's opinion. So under the law, to support the C1 upgrade, the result of the assessment has to indicate a non-impaired benthic macroinvertebrate community, which is assessed and scored as either excellent or good, and DEP found that this segment satisfied that standard. The other component or factor of the under the law for the C1 upgrade was the in-stream habitat, optimal in-stream habitat. So I'll talk a little bit about that assessment as it was, discussed by the court. Optimal in-stream habitat is a variety of habitats within the stream, stable banks with little siltation or channelization, a variety of velocities and stream depths, and a riparian zone covered with native vegetation where plants grow naturally and an unimpacted riparian zone. It requires a qualitative habitat assessment of the benthic community, and that assessment can result in various ratings ranging from optimal to poor. DEP here considered data collected by RHA between 2012 and 2017 in assessing the in-stream habitat for the Three Bridges segment. And the court notes that followed EPA's protocol for sampling and scoring the data collected, and it was identical to DEP's process as well. The result of that assessment was an optimal rating at 2 of the 3 monitoring stations for this segment. So that kind of sets the stage for the appeals, and Bill did a great job of kind of explaining the story of why there was a controversy here and what the impact of the regulations were on potential development. And my colleague Dan Greenhouse will get in more depth on the legal issues on appeal, but in general, there were allegations of DEP violating the procedural requirements of the APA, whether DEP failed to consider a habitat assessment report and associated data that were submitted by the appellants in their public comments, whether DEP failed to adequately describe the affected water bodies and deprive the public of notice. There was some controversy about some maps that DEP had used during the rulemaking process and whether those could be used by the public to put them on notice about how these regulations might actually impact them. And then, of course, whether the C1 designation for this segment was supported by evidence. And that's the issue that the citizen scientists data collection falls under. RTMUA submitted a professional report which took issue with DEP's reliance on some of that data. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Dan Greenhouse.
As Dan is bringing up his slides, for those attorneys in the room, your verification code is 72022, 72022. For attorneys only. If you're not an attorney, you don't need that code. So, Dan, thank you very much.
Hey, can everyone hear me? Good.
Yes.
Okay, great. So, thank you to everyone, the hosts and the participants. Like Chris said, it's really great that everyone is spending some of their Friday afternoon here. And what I'd like to do is to not, repeat anything that was said before, but I do want to go over some of the very discrete legal issues that were raised by the appellants who are challenging DEP's upgrade of the anti-degradation, the surface water quality standard on these segments of the river there. So again, I want to highlight that this was an appeal to the appellate court. So there was not a trial. There was not a trial or an adjudication. There was not an opportunity for cross-examination of witnesses. It was an administrative rulemaking procedure where DEP took an administrative record or took its evidence, made a decision along with accepting and responding to public comments, and then promulgated its rule after notice. So what the challengers were challenging was a rule in the appellate division, and the record on appeal consisted of the administrative record that made its way into the appeal or into that case. So again, we're not talking about a situation where you could put the volunteer scientists up on a stand and cross-examine them or look over their shoulders as they were taking samples or looking down into the water with their waders on. And this was an appeal that was based upon the administrative record. So I want to walk you through 4 discrete issues as quickly as I can so that there's time for questions and answers. I know that we're done in about 15 minutes, so I'll try to walk through these 4 issues as quickly as I can. So again, this was not a trial or an adjudication of these issues, but the court deciding these issues. And then once I present the issues, then I'll also talk about what the appellant said about them, what DEP said about them, what our client said about them as amici or friends of the court, and then what the court decided. So issue number 1, did DEP inappropriately rely on data from a downstream monitoring station to change the surface water quality designation of a stretch upstream? So again, what you have to understand here is, just like all the presenters said, and I'm sure that you're all aware of, there's not an infinite amount of resources to test every square foot of the stream, and you have to selectively choose where to monitor the stream or the river. And so in this case, the DEP relied on some data from downstream monitoring stations to indicate things upstream. So let's see what was said about that. So in this case, the appellants argued that the proposal identified a part of the river, the Raritan River, listed as a confluence with the Neshannock River, based upon a downstream endpoint, and claimed, again, this is pretty much cut and paste from the RTMUA's brief here, that the NJDP has no regulatory basis for considering data from monitoring stations located downstream of the listed segment. So as scientists or attorneys, you could probably appreciate the argument, the logic of it, but you might also see the other side. And that was DEP's counter argument here, which is that it's not located within the listed segment, SB08, that was the designation of that, that monitoring station, but that DEP used SB07, which was in that station. And because water and sediment travel downstream, SB08 is located downstream of the listed segment, that optimal rating confirms the upstream monitoring station's location. And then I'm going to skip through the issues and then we'll get to the court's holding because the issues are related. So the next discrete issue that was raised by the appellants was, did NJDEP inappropriately rely on a single monitoring station to change surface water quality designation of a 6-mile stretch of river? Again, in an ideal world, you might be able to monitor every square foot of a river, or even just at least every 100 feet or so, or 100 yards. But in this case, there were not infinite resources, and they had a single monitoring station, or at least just a monitoring station that was divided by around 5.3 miles from the next. So the appellant's argument, again, pretty much cut and pasted from RTMUA's brief here. NJDP has not explained how a single sampling point serves to justify finding the entirety of the listed segment contained optimal in-stream habitat. And I'm not going to go over the legal standard again, but let's just look at this discrete issue. Can this argument stand? Is there enough evidence for one monitoring station to indicate almost 6 miles or 5.3 miles, more like almost 5 miles of that stream? So DEP's counter argument was that it's a little misleading to say that it's a single sampling point, because first of all, there were 2 years at that one single monitoring station. And then further, there were also downstream monitoring stations employed, which is related to issue number 1. And there was a low percentage of impervious surface, which was a different factor as Chris had listed in his slides, so that it wasn't really just a single monitoring station, but there were a number of other variables too. So let's go look at issue number 3. What if what if 4 of the past 6 years showed a suboptimal in-stream habitat? Again, let's see what DEP has to say, or the appellant argued that the monitoring station in question, SB07, presented an optimal upstream habitat, not every single year for the past 6 years. So it was suboptimal for 4 years, and only optimal for 2. And I'm sure you can appreciate the strength of that argument too, as a scientist or an attorney. Well, 4 out of 6 is a majority of the last 6 years. But let's see DEP's counter argument. DEP says that although SB07 has recorded 4 suboptimal ratings since 2012, the last 2 demonstrated improving conditions, which allowed the stream segment to be considered for the C1 designation. Again, so DEP's consideration was that the most recent 2 years trumped the previous 4 years beyond that. And so let's jump to issue number 4. Again, I'm going to be just discussing 4 issues here, and then we'll go to the court's decision. The 4th issue was, did NJDEP arbitrarily rely on data from untrained volunteers here and ignore the appellant's expert testimony? So I'm going to summarize appellant's argument. There are a few slides here. You can look back at these slides, and you can look also at the decision itself if you want to learn more about this argument and how the court treated it. But I'll summarize it for you. So the appellant, the RTMUA, and then there were other appellants and other amici too from the developers and builders side, but just RTMUA made this argument that the RHA, the Raritan Headwaters Association, local volunteers are not trained biologists, and that, again, continued here, that EPA really, that the EPA's matrix really requires, and DEP's habitat assessment scoring matrix really requires some expertise. So in this case, they presented an expert after. Again, this is a procedural issue that was dealt with mainly in the court's decision, but after the upgrade of the stream by DEP, after the rule was adopted, then, or after the rule was proposed, then the appellants presented an expert report to the DEP. It wasn't presented pursuant to a QUAP or before the rule was proposed. So while and this is what the appellant's expert said. This is the quote. He concluded that no dispassionate professional would assess this reach of the South Branch Raritan River as optimal habitat. And the appellants argued that the difference between the appellant's expert habitat assessment and the RHA's assessment can be attributed to the difference in experience between the trained professional biologist with decades of experience and volunteers for RHA. Now, this is DEP's counterargument to that issue. DEP considers data generated by other entities, including governmental agencies and outside stakeholders who have a QUAP, but don't consider data gathered not in accordance or submitted not in accordance with an approved QUAP. And then we opined on behalf of our clients here that and we really tried to educate the court. As friends of the court, we did our best to educate the court about the extent that the citizen scientists are trained and the degree of circumspection and attention to detail and how qualified the data really is and how much the EPA urges states to employ citizen science and how much New Jersey has adopted this approach and how successful it is and all the reasons therefore. Now, the court decided, I'll sum it up for you so we have some time for questions here, but you should read these slides if you're interested. These are the highlights. So the court summed it up and said that with regard to issue number 1, 2, and 3, this is 1, 2, and 3 all summed up here, The selection of monitoring stations is well within the DEP's technical expertise and is entitled to deference. Again, I'm not going to be spending any time here because I really don't have the time to educate you about the case law surrounding this legal standard, but the court deferred to the DEP's technical expertise, and the DEP explained that it relied on the quality assured data supplied by RHA citizen scientists, and that the public comment, the appellant's expert report, did not dissuade it from that decision. So again, with regard to issue number 4, the court used the same legal standard and said, given its technical expertise, it was reasonable for the DEP to rely upon scientific data that is collected pursuant to a QUAP and to exclude data that was not. The court went on, and I might add here, this is really important to everyone here. This should be really important to everyone. The court went on to recognize that the RHA staff train volunteers annually, and that the record supports the conclusion that the data gathered by the citizen scientists here was reliable, and that the DEP was confident in using that data to upgrade the water bodies to a C1 designation. And again, the legal standard here is that it was well within the DEP's discretion to determine what scientific data it would rely upon, and that the RHA citizen scientists and volunteers collected reliable data that the DEP was confident in. Again, and there's a clear statement at the end of the decision here that contrary to RTMUA's claims, the EPA does not require data collection to be conducted by biologists or experts in the field in terms of their training background. You don't need a PhD. The community water monitoring, and this is a direct quote again from the decision, the community water monitoring is a recognized method of acquiring needed water quality data utilized by the DEP, because it's not an ideal world and the DEP can't go out and do data collection at every square foot of the rivers all over every year. So that the CWM is important and served as a fundamental and important critical basis for the DEP's upgrades of the anti-degradation water quality standards here in this case. And I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, and I appreciate it. Hopefully there's a few minutes for questions.
Thank you very much, Dan. I am not seeing any questions at this moment. If anyone has any, please put them in. That was very, very extensive description from everyone. And as I think Dan or maybe Chris mentioned, it was a 90-some page opinion from the court that really, really went through all of the arguments and addressed them in a large amount of detail, which is not always the case from courts. They really went and really addressed it. So here's, I guess, a question for Dan or Chris. Do the legal experts feel that this case will set an important precedent?
I can just jump in, and I'm sure Dan has thoughts too, but I think it sets an important precedent for citizen science and community volunteers. It sends a message that, when you follow established protocols and you do it the right way, it's valuable and reliable. And it was great to see that the court, recognized that.
That's good. And next question, did the court rely on existing precedent?
Dan, you want to?
Yes, this was not a first look, really. I don't think that the court set any precedent with regard to a new legal standard, but the court really did for the first time make a statement about how community water monitoring is important. But again, this is an unpublished decision. So in terms of its precedential value, it cannot be cited as a published decision in New Jersey, and therefore it has a very specific precedential value or lack of precedential value, depending upon how you look at it. Again, this is an unpublished appellate level decision, but I believe that is very persuasive, and it should show anyone else looking at this issue that the community water monitoring program employed by RHA is appropriate, that the DEP has proper procedures in place that will be upheld if challenged again, and that the EPA does not require trained biologists to collect this data. And so all of these issues that were decided by the court do have some precedential value.
All right. A question: if a party wanted to change the regulations to require biologists to do this assessment or require spatially finer monitoring sites, what would they have to do? I would say that and I don't know if any of our scientists have a statement on that, but scientists do that. They may not have a BS in biology from a university, but they are highly trained individuals who are doing monitoring. But that would be a DEP question, to reach out to them.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. So the DEP publishes a methods document along with their integrated report that explains how they make all of the assessments, all of the decision making that goes into it. So if you have comments for that, I invite you to submit them. I believe the methods document will be updated with the next report, and there should be a comment period. So you can look out for that.
All right. All right. One last question: would the documentation for PFAS contamination be accepted by the courts if gathered by citizen scientists? Well,
So-
I mean, that's an interesting one.
So the DEP would accept it if the data was analyzed by a lab that has been certified by the Office of Quality Assurance. We talked a lot about bioassessment today, but on the chemical side, it is a little bit more straightforward for the use of community data because we do require the use of certified labs.
Good. All right. Everyone can see we have a link to some of the resources we talked about, including the actual appellate court decision. So that is in the PDF. If you can go to the next slide, Aaron, which is not in your PDF because I forgot to add it. I want to remind people that we are having our 7th annual Watershed Conference on February 23rd. Registration is open. You can go to our website, thewatershed.org, to register. It's going to be an exciting and very informative process, and hopefully we'll be able to provide CEUs at that as well. And with that, like to thank everyone and our panelists. This was incredibly informative. Sorry it went a little bit long, but hey, a lot of information. We will be sending out the recording shortly. If you are an attorney and you have the verification form, please return that to me. And assuming you attended the whole thing, I will send out your attendance certification. And again, we're going to be sending out in a couple days the webinar, the recording, and the PowerPoints. So everyone, thank you very much. Bill, Christy, Chris, and Dan, thank you. And Aaron, thank you very much. And hopefully I'll see some of you next Friday on Stormwater Designs, Myth and Misconceptions. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Hi, everybody. Have a good afternoon. Have a good weekend.
You too.